So essentially, for me, what's interesting about sport and politics are the three ways it's interconnected. And again, for those of you who've been in the class, you know this. One of them is the way sports can help to push diplomacy forward. Often there are things that can happen in sport that can grease the wheels of diplomacy in a way that a diplomatic démarche cannot. There's certain preconditions for that sort of result to obtain, and we can talk about those. But that's certainly one area in which sports and politics are linked. The other is sport and national identity. And here, in many ways, sports becomes a very powerful prism through which national identity, nationalism can get refracted. And you see this from just the general pride that you feel when you see your country's team doing well or athletes doing well in the Olympics, to much more pitched battles, as we've seen in things like the soccer war or other sorts of things. And then the third area is sport and change. And here in particular, we're talking about sport and physical change and sport and political change. Physical change in the sense that when countries or cities host these big mega sporting events, it really does lead to physical change of the cities, if not the countries. And political change in the sense of, and we were talking about this just a second ago, that sport inherently carries certain values with it. The notion of free and fair competition, equal opportunity, best performance wins. These all are value-laden things. And so in a sense, sport can help to create change, political change, not simply physical change. And there are some historic examples of that. Now, if you look at this framework, what does that mean for what we've just witnessed, London, and when you compare it to, in my case, I compare it to Beijing because the book I wrote was really geared towards looking at the Olympics in Beijing in 2008. And so there are three very quick observations. The first observation is that if there is a debate in the field about the extent to which sports should just be about sports or whether sports is political, one of the great things about London, at least in comparison to Beijing, was that it really felt like it was just about sports. You didn't have sort of major political issues. You had some, but you didn't have major political issues. You had the issue of the plastic Brit, right? The so-called plastic Brit. People who were playing for British teams but were not really and carried British citizenship but were not considered to be imported players, right? That was sort of the big controversy. But really small in scale when you compare it to the sort of politics we saw in advance of the Beijing game. So in that sense, London was much less political, and in that sense, much more refreshing. This contrasted, of course, with Beijing, where it was intensely political. The atmosphere prior to the games, you could argue, was even poisoned because of all the politics that were going on. We had a delegation here from China where we had discussion about sports and politics, and they got very upset at the connections that were being made between sports and politics. And I think part of the reason why you have this dichotomy between what happened in London and what happened in Beijing is that when a regime, an illiberal regime like China, hosts the games, hosts something that is for the entire world to see, that is about the Olympics and the Olympic ideal, this creates a huge spotlight on the country that then gets leveraged for different purposes by different groups who are trying to affect political change or who are simply trying to embarrass the regime. And you don't have, and so the regime has to react to that in some fashion, right? Say that they are adhering to these Olympic ideals when it's very difficult for them to adhere to these Olympic ideals. And that's the difference with London, because in London you didn't have this particular problem of trying to wrap a politically closed regime around a very open event like the Olympics. The third and last point I'll make is that there was one political event that happened during the Olympic Games, and that was when the Koreans played the Japanese in, what was it, the semifinals or the finals?
You mean the badminton? Is that what you're talking about?
Soccer.
Oh, soccer.
Or the bronze medal.
It was a bronze medal match, right? Between and
the Japanese.
The Koreans won the match, but then in the middle of their celebration, one of the players took a card, I guess, that he got from the audience, and he opened it, and it said, what did it say? It said, "Tokdo is our land."
Right.
And Tokdo refers to an island dispute between the Koreans and the Japanese that has gotten pretty hot and heavy over the past summer. And so this, I assume, was a spontaneous outburst, but it was, very political, captured a lot of headlines. He was not allowed to be part of the ceremony to receive his bronze medal, but he was treated like a national hero in Korea, right? Exempted from mandatory military service. He'd probably be selling Samsung cell phones, he just, and he made the national team for the World Cup for Korea, just treated like a hero. And the point there I just want to make in closing is that I think sports is much more political in Asia than it is in other parts of the world. And I think part of that has to do with development, because for countries in Asia, cities in Asia, these events, when they come, really become benchmarks. They become benchmarks of development, of national branding, of political accomplishment, of leadership legitimacy, in a way that you really don't see elsewhere in the world. One of the reasons why that's the case is because big events like the Olympics or the World Cup come so rarely to Asia. Right? I mean, Beijing was only the third time since 1896 that the Summer Olympics have come to East Asia. No offense to Australia, but to East Asia, they've only come 3 times: Tokyo in '64, Seoul in '88, Beijing in 2008. And so in each of those cases, these became huge political events to mark a country's coming out, their arrival on the international stage, in a way that you don't see, for example, in London. London was a wonderful games. I thought it was fantastic. It was done really well. It only cost $14 billion, right, compared to Beijing, where's Jake? Beijing cost $44 billion? $44 billion. So it was a wonderful Olympics, but it didn't have sort of the same political stakes attached to it as these games in Asia. And then lastly, I think, is when you combine those two things with the fact that history is still very much alive in Asia, I think you get a very potent cocktail of nationalism, sport, and politics. So with that, I will hand it over to the experts.
Thank you very much, Victor. Cindy. Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service for inviting me here today. I'm particularly pleased because 2 of my former colleagues at USAID, where I worked for a long time, Dr. Carol Lancaster and Jennifer Windsor, are both here. And it's nice to be here with them. I'm honored to serve on the panel with Professor Cha. Like he said, he and my husband Edgard go way back, and when we were in China for 4 years, I didn't see my husband very much because of the party talks and Victor and his colleagues, but it's nice to be on the panel with you now. And your book, The Final Score, serves as such an important read for young Foreign Service officers with the desire to do sports programming before they head out to the field. I'm also honored to serve on the panel with Professor Markovits and look forward to hearing more about his work on female fandom. Today, what I'd like to do is 3 things: provide you a brief overview of the State Department's Sports Diplomacy Division, touch briefly on our sports programming in the Olympics, and talk about a few recent programs that illustrate how sports can serve as an entry point in countries where there is limited space for traditional public diplomacy and outreach programs.
Would it be terrible to ask you to stand up?
Oh,
unfortunately, this room is horribly set up, so people in the back have a hard time seeing. So, thanks.
So how many people actually knew there was a sports division at the State Department? Oh, that's pretty good.
Very well educated.
Okay.
That's
Because of years? So we actually have 4 pillars. We have the Sports Envoy program, where we send out high-profile sports envoys, working with our embassies overseas. It's basically a public diplomacy outreach program. So we've sent Michelle Kwan all over the world, the ice skater. We've sent Barry Larkin, Ken Griffey Jr., Cal Ripken Jr., We just sent Swin Cash to London before the Olympics. So we work on high-profile athletes to work with our embassies, and they conduct clinics and they give speeches, and our target is underserved youth overseas. We also have sports visitors, and those are groups of kids or coaches who work with underserved youth, and we bring them to the U.S. for about 2 weeks to see the U.S. through the lens of sport. So people-to-people exchange program. We also have a sports grants program, which we give grants to 501c3 organizations here in the U.S. to do two-way exchanges. Most of those are either universities or nonprofits doing the same thing, sports exchanges focused on underserved youth. And we've also just started a new program called our Empowering Women and Girls Through Sports Initiative, where we do a similar combination of sports envoys and sports visitors. And we have a new program that we've started, which is a mentorship program, where we've brought 17 women from around the world and paired them up with high-profile females in the American sports world for a 1-month program. And we're doing that in conjunction with ESPNW. They're the ones who actually recruited the mentors, and they're supporting the program along with University of Tennessee. Sarah Hillier, you may be familiar with, who was here last year, I guess, is supporting that program with the University of Tennessee. So those are our 4 main programs. What we find is sometimes in countries it's very hard for our embassies to get traction with their counterparts in the government or to reach out to the people. We found this in places like Venezuela, in Burma, even in Russia. And so our ambassadors and our public affairs folks will come to us and say, can we have a sports program? And a lot of times those sports programs will open up doors that they haven't been able to open otherwise. They may not be able to reach the person that they want to talk to in the Kremlin, but Ambassador Bill Burns can go to a hockey game with his, person he wants to talk to, and all of a sudden it's easier to communicate. So that's sort of what we do in a nutshell. I brought a video, which I'm not sure whether I can actually...
That's Barry.
That's Barry. That's Michelle. That's Evan Lysacek. Dikembe Mutombo in South Sudan. That's Tony Sanaa in Ethiopia, former MLS player.
Yes.
That's Blaze Sports. That's one of our grantees in Haiti. Grassroots soccer in Malawi. Get to the video. World Learning. This is kids from Turkey and Armenia together on a program. Mobility International. This is an envoy program in China, in Guangzhou. And we've done a lot with the U.S. Women's National Team, which has been great. And these are photos from our new initiative, Empowering Women and Girls Through Sports. So, let's see if I can get to that's in Uganda. This is an NCAA visitor program that we did for the Women's Final Four. And this is a council that we started, which is basically an advisory council on our Empowering Women and Girls Through Sports initiative. Let's see.
Okay. What we could do is actually just put that up on our website so people can see the
that sounds
videos
great.
around. I think that might work well. So check our website. We can do that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. And then we'll move to Andy.
Thank you very much. Kate, thank you so much for inviting me. When I was here a year and a half ago, it was just a wonderful, wonderful gig. It's wonderful also to connect with Kate and other friends at Georgetown. I would like to pick up on some points that Professor Chom mentioned, and I actually would like to sort of address the darker side of sports and actually slightly disagree with him that the ugly sides that actually he discussed so well in Asia are particular to Asia. They are alive and well everywhere else, and for one simple reason. They're alive and well because sports are so deeply emotional and they're so deeply felt, and they are also what the great sports historian Johann Huizinga called agonistic. If not antagonistic, they're agonistic. So sports are zero-sum. I win, you lose, I win. Okay? Meaning that becomes, if that's important, okay, in whatever context, it becomes emotional. And if it becomes emotional, you also are trying everything in your power to get into the other guy's head. Okay? And by doing so, you invoke all kinds of things that make her or him insecure. Okay? So in fact, you invoke points of national disgrace or national or collective hurt. So for example, I was absolutely not surprised that some of my beloved Manchester United fans still, even this Sunday, yesterday, after the horrible event of the 96 killed in Hillsborough, of course invoked Liverpool dead, the Liverpool dead, as a form of affront. Just like the Scouse fans invoked the Manchester United crash in 1958. Okay? And this is common when I'm actually starting a big study of rivalry games in the United States, in which I argue that indeed, Michigan State, especially in-state rivalry games, and it's very clear that in fact, that fans are picking up on precisely the things that hurt the most. So, alas, Europe may be better, but I don't think so. I mean, in this case, clearly the last vestiges of absolutely completely unvarnished, but indeed completely legitimate forms of the vilest racism and anti-Semitism are on the soccer grounds in Europe. Okay? It's the last place where people still sing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in the Rechtskurve of various games. Clearly this is overdetermined, it's disproportionately male, it's disproportionately young, but it's also actually a form of in-your-faceness. And that's what nationalism is. Okay, so in fact, I had lunch with Steve Sylvia, and we're talking about this rivalry thing. I said, Andy, it's exactly it. Being a Michigan fan or a Michigan State fan or a Hoya fan, you are actually exhibiting on a smaller scale the same kind of passions, which are rational and oftentimes actually quite ugly, because you want to win at all costs. And so I give a couple of other things about the London Olympics which I found very troubling. For example, not allowing a minute of silence for the Israeli athletes murdered in Munich by the IOC. Okay, this was a highly political thing, completely political. Okay. Furthermore, Britain, as you well know, there's no such thing as Britain in the English sport of football or rugby or cricket. These are the four British nations. But there was actually a Team GB. And I found it particularly troubling that basically the Scottish Football Association and the Welsh Football Association more or less regarded as high treason if their players would participate in Team GB. So in other words, it's another form of tribalism. It's another form of particularism, which is, I would say, quite unique to sports precisely because it is so highly emotionalized. And it is so high. So I was not surprised at all. You hear this all the time. You go to a Romania-Hungary game and suddenly the issue of Transylvania appears. And all kinds of slogans appear that in the rest of the political discourse have been laid to rest. We know that the Yugoslav wars started in a game between Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade. Okay? That's how it started. When the bad blue boys of Dinamo Zagreb basically defended and actually they attacked the Red Star, who of course were the other thugs. And basically, of course, Boban, the great star of Dinamo Zagreb, kicks a Serbian policeman. And this is the beginning of it. Okay. Now, clearly, it's the last spark, obviously. But those sports which are tied to passion allow a form of, to use my word from the book that Kate kindly mentioned, counter-cosmopolitanism. Counter-cosmopolitanism, which I actually, again, let's take the good Europe, don't see anywhere else but on the football grounds. And it's alive and well. Racism, it's a constant. You just look at what happened to John Terry, okay, the current England captain who resigned because of a racist slur. Okay? This is, so just to end on this, again, I also have wonderful stories about sports as well. But precisely because they're both cosmopolitan, they're actually completely meritocratic, they are international, they are enlightening, they form a bond, but the minute there is issues of passion and winning becomes important, you enter into all kinds of shenanigans like cheating, but be it sort of stuff that goes on at colleges in the United States or all the doping scandals, whatever, because it's so important to have that gold haul. I mean, just look at the Russians. I mean, Putin fired his entire staff because the Russians didn't come out with the equivalent, I'm not quite sure what that would have been, from the Vancouver, the Russian team, and the words you use, for instance, Bildzeitung. On Sunday, the Olympics started on Friday. On Sunday or Monday, it was something like, beschämend. Okay, we are ashamed. Okay, that we still not have, this is the third day of the contest, that Kazakhstan has more gold medals than Germany. Beschämend. Okay, they don't write beschämend when they bomb Turkish, homes. Okay, so the point is that it talks to a deeply emotionalized thing. I don't mean to exonerate the Asians here, but I certainly mean to implicate the others. And, this is unfortunately alive and well, and I don't see it receding at any time precisely because it is so deeply emotionally charged, all about pride, about identity, about maleness, about honor. They looked at us funny, So this is, it's a, there you have it.
Okay, I was very cruel to our speakers by making them kind of give them only 10 minutes to talk. But I think in opening up to Q&A, you can kind of probe and see where we might take this conversation. I also realized I was remiss by not pointing out that one of the reasons why we decided to hold the panel was because of the Olympics. And I have to say, now we're in the middle of the semester and we're all sort of heavy and burdened by, and we've forgotten about the joyous days of summer when we got to watch the Olympics on and enjoy it. But certainly some of the remarks did touch on the Olympics and thinking in a comparative sense. Let me just start by sort of maybe saying, I think this is very interesting because we had three quite different perspectives in the sense of, on the one hand, sports as a potential tool for very positive interaction, political interaction and change, and maybe in ways that are not captured by sort of normal diplomacy and so on. As well as, I think, in Professor Cha's comments, an interesting effort at sort of trying to compare across the different cases, compare, and clearly Beijing and London, very different phenomenon in many different ways. But then also the pointing out of the commonalities that stretch across all these, on the sort of, again, the darker side.